Welcome to Finding Forgiveness, a family fairy tale podcast. Join host Susan Gibson as she summons the courage to ask the hard questions, probes deep, dark secrets, and attempts to fill in the gaps while exploring the relationship between her and her mother. Discover the magic of self-discovery, relationship exploration, and the profound journey of forgiveness. Now, your host, Susan Gibson.
Have you ever wanted to share a secret, something deep down inside you, perhaps a family secret that you've buried or pushed out of your consciousness? Content advisory for this episode. I'll be sharing family secrets of depression, anxiety, and suicide. If you or someone you know needs help, dial 988. It's the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. People are standing by to help no matter the crisis. What's the purpose of keeping a secret? Perhaps it's embarrassment. Perhaps it's privacy. Perhaps it's not yours to share. What happens when your family has a culture of keeping secrets? You learn to not ask questions. You learn to not speak up or speak out. You don't know where to turn when you need more help. Resources aren't readily known or even considered. Everything is kept secret within the family unit. However, family unit may not be your best option for help and support. All families have secrets, and it's not like no one knows about them. It's that no one talks about them, even within the family. This is the danger zone, the silence. This culture of silence gets passed from one generation to the next. It leads one to believe that they need to handle their own experiences and traumas on their own. No outside intervention. Otherwise, the secret is out. It's no longer a secret. My great-grandfather, my mother's father's father, took his own life. My grandfather found him. My mother was a child at the time. They were forbidden to talk about it. They were forbidden to ask how their father was. What an incredible trauma to have endured, leaving a wound that never healed in the family because of silence. When the youngest child, my mother's youngest brother, asked his mother what was happening, she said, "I'll tell you once, but we'll never talk about it again, and you are not to ask your father about it ever." Silence. When he saw his father in bed all day, having a dark day, as they called it, no one spoke about it. No one asked father how he was. He was left alone, and there was silence. When my mother had her own trauma in high school, her nervous breakdown due to extreme anxiety, no one talked about it. Silence. When my mother, a young woman by this time, found a family member who was attempting to take their own life, she broke the cycle of silence, insisting that this person was allowed to seek psychiatric care. They did, and they learned to cope with their own dark days. When my mother's youngest brother grew up and had his own family, he too broke the cycle of silence. He told his children about his grandfather's death by suicide, about his father's dark days, his family members' attempt to take their own life. He wanted them to know that we need help in this world. We need to talk about these family secrets. We need to ask for help. I was talking with a family member recently, and they told me talking about it is the hardest thing when they're feeling consumed by the dark days. that it's hard to be honest about it. We need to find a way to break this silence. I've been reading about intergenerational trauma and how it's passed from one generation to the next. Keeping these family secrets secret is killing us. I know it's impacted my own life. When I've experienced a trauma, I didn't talk about it. I didn't ask for help. It wasn't even part of my thought process. It wasn't a conscious decision. Oh, I can't ask for help because it'll expose me, it'll embarrass me, it'll expose another person, it'll embarrass another person. It didn't even enter my mind to ask for help. Silence. The story of my mother and me, the trauma of her abandoning me in my teens, was never discussed with my family. I certainly never talked about it. Instead, I made up stories to share should anyone ask me about my mother. The most outrageous was that she was dead, because people were less likely to ask questions or pass judgment if I said she was dead. Thankfully, I never had to use these stories, but they certainly have consumed a lot of my energy and mental capacity over all these years. Silence. When I descended into my own cycle of depression, it was in the mid-90s, I would have been in my mid-30s, I did ask for help. I'd had these periods of anxiety and depression, usually triggered by visits by my mother. Anxiety beforehand, depression afterwards. It was during this period where I was trying to redefine and reestablish a relationship with my mother. And so I was being very intentional about spending time together. And she would come every year and spend Christmas with me. We also would plan a trip of some kind during each year, and I would plan to go visit her in her home each year as a way to get to know one another again. The anxiety and the depression, the beforehand and the afterwards. I was a heavy drinker for many years. By some standards, I was an alcoholic. But this time, the alcohol wasn't helping. My insomnia was high, not sleeping for days at a time. Even with the alcohol, I couldn't sleep. I just couldn't shake the depression. I was also taking birth control pills at that time, and they do contribute to depression. And I looked into that as well. Like, is there something I could do to shake out of it? By my own purpose and intention. Get over it. Get over the depression. I was still functioning, sort of, or rather going through the motion, traveling for work, working long days, drinking late into the night and all weekend, drinking a lot of coffee. I had an obsession with caffeine. I was not sleeping. So I asked my doctor if she could recommend someone. I'll never forget her question to me. Are you experiencing anxiety or depression? I said depression. She gave me a number to call, which was part of my insurance plan, and I saw a therapist for 3 months. She helped me with a significant breakthrough and opened doors in my mind that I wasn't ready to go through. She had me keep a journal, but the thoughts I was writing down terrified me. And I certainly didn't want anyone else to read it. So I shredded the journal. However, I did feel better after those 3 months, and the depression was lifted. She had also addressed my insomnia. I went to a sleep clinic, got kind of officially diagnosed by a doctor specializing in sleep disorders and insomnia, which is my sleep disorder. And my doctor, my personal physician, knew me very well. and she knew that I was not going to take heavy duty meds to help me to sleep. She actually had given me a sample, and I took them, and I totally fought them all night long. I would not allow myself to go to sleep. That wasn't going to work. So between her and my therapist, they gave me techniques to help me get better sleep. And that was that. I went on. I'm forever grateful for the breakthrough and the insomnia work we did together, but the anxiety and the was still inside of me. When COVID hit in 2020, my anxiety kicked into high gear. It reared its head once again in a big way. My insomnia was really bad. Again, no sleep for days at a time. By this time, I had quit drinking caffeine and alcohol. So as I say, I was feeling all the feels. I started sleepwalking again. I had been plagued with sleepwalking off and on in my adult life, along with the insomnia. My OCD pattern of counting things became, well, an obsession again. My body chemistry changed. The foods that I ate and loved made me physically ill. I had to start all over again, figuring out what food was palatable. What could I keep down? The isolation was overwhelming. My life partner was on what we thought was a typical business trip out of the country at that time and got stuck in their lockdown for 8 weeks. One day while he was away, I heard all this screaming in the parking lot outside my high-rise apartment building. When I looked out the window, I saw 2 women hugging each other and screaming with delight. I broke down and sobbed. I felt so alone. It took me a year to talk about it. In that year, I started walking outside every day, rain or shine. I started cooking all of my own meals, no outside food. I was a vegetarian when COVID hit and became a vegan. I had started practicing yoga a year prior. It became a daily practice. I started meditating every day. When I finally talked about it, I did a clean slate with myself and shared it with others. How is this anxiety failing me? I shared all the controlling activities and those that couldn't be controlled. Rigid schedule for everything, from eating and exercising to towel rotation. Counting and counting and counting. How many towels, how many napkins, how many spoons, forks, knives, how many this, how many that, again and again and again. Sleepwalking, insomnia, unable to eat foods that I loved. I had to cut pepper out, allspice, everything. And I loved all those things. How is this anxiety enabling me? Daily exercise, which is now an integral part of my life. Healthy home cooking and eating, now an integral part of my life. Meditation and yoga, now an integral part of my life. Better sleep habits, being more conscious of my sleep patterns and how they contribute to my overall well-being. No more sleepwalking. Though when I still have days of high anxiety. I live in a state of higher anxiety. It's one thing I've learned about myself. And in those days when it's really, really high and I'm vibrating at a very high frequency, I do check in with my life partner about my sleeping habits. I want to make sure I'm not sleepwalking. The funny thing about sleepwalking is you don't know it's happening. However, when you wake up in the morning, something is different than it was when you went to sleep. Something has moved that you don't remember moving. Environment is different, but you have no memory of it. I've even had nights where I've gotten up and showered and gotten dressed and didn't know until I woke up fully clothed. So I do watch out for that. And that I know that's a trigger of high anxiety, and I need to take care of myself when I'm in that situation. My counting, still there. It's an old friend. It's an old friend I've had since I was a small child. It's greatly reduced, however, and I'm very aware of it now. And when it happens, I assess, do I let myself count? Sometimes that is a way to counteract my anxiety. I just let it happen. I'm not going to fight it. But most of the time, because it comes up every day, most of the time, I just say to myself very calmly, no counting. As though I'm talking to that small child inside of me. No counting. I know how many towels I have. I know how many glasses I have. I don't need to count those today. In the second year of COVID, I saw a therapist every week for a year and got phenomenal help. Phenomenal help. We talked about all of these things. My insomnia, my sleepwalking, the scale of my anxiety, my nightmares as well. It was, my mother had passed by this time. I started this therapy shortly after she passed away. And it was just an enormous help to me. However, I didn't ask for the help. My life partner suggested, when my mother was in her final days, suggested that I might want to talk to somebody outside of the family unit. And he helped me find a therapist. And she was just phenomenal. And I appreciate the role of therapy in one's life. We need help in this life. We cannot do this by ourselves. It's too much. There's too much every day. And one thing I've learned is we do need to ask for help. And when you grow up in a family culture where it's all inward facing, that we don't expose these secrets outside of the family unit, it's very difficult to understand how to ask for help. Hey, my family is awesome. They've loved and supported me throughout my whole life and continue to do so. I love them dearly. However, there are times when we need help outside of our family unit. We need somebody who can give us an objective view and perspective into our life. Someone who isn't part of the story of our life. Someone who is a listener and an observer of us, ourselves, an individual who's living life to the best of our ability. So where are we in all of this? I broke the silence. I'm breaking it now. I now talk about my anxiety. I check in with myself and others on a deeper plane. How are you really doing today? And if they always say I'm okay, I want to know more. What can I do to support you today? I'm here for you. Whatever you need, I'm here for you. I am strong. I am invincible. I am woman. Thank you, Helen Reddy, for those words. I ask for help and I talk about it, or try to at least. We're all just doing the best we can every day. Look out for one another. Look out for yourself. Look out for one another. If there's someone who's always answering you in the same way, every single time that you ask them how are they doing, go deeper. Make eye contact with people when you're out there in the world. You know, the person who's checking you out at the grocery store or the Quick Mart or the big box store, look them in the eye. How are you today? They always ask you, how are you? Just ask them back, how are you today? I remember you from last time. We talked about this, that, or the other thing. Smile at strangers. I have a anxiety around strangers that I always avoid contact with strangers, quite frankly. And I'm doing my best to overcome that, to look at people in the eye, to ask them, how are you? To not just look down or away and go about my business. That extension of myself to others is a big part of my breaking the silence. I grew up where it's mind your own business. This is my business, it's not yours. It doesn't belong in the public space. If I've learned anything about these years, especially since I've really faced my anxiety since the beginning of COVID, and that overwhelming feeling of isolation, just reaching out figuratively to lend a helping hand to somebody else who may be having a dark day and doing their best to show up every day, can change us in that moment. Do you have a family secret that's holding you back in some way? Something that's buried deep inside of you? Or something that you've been conditioned to not discuss or talk about or bring out into the light? I invite you to share it with me. You can rest assured it won't go any further. It's not my secret to share. You can email me at hellosusan@findingforgivenesspodcast.com. If you or someone you know needs help, please ask for help. Please intervene on their behalf. Dial 988. It's the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Don't stay silent. Thank you for being with me today and listening to my podcast, Finding Forgiveness, a Family Fairy Tale. I welcome your comments. A big thank you to the team at Produce Your Podcast for helping me share my family fairy tale. Until next time, I'm Susan Gibson, signing off with gratitude and appreciation.
Thank you for listening to Finding Forgiveness, a family fairy tale podcast. To continue the conversation, visit findingforgivenesspodcast.com and send an email to hellosusan@findingforgivenesspodcast.com to share your story. Until we meet again.